We have a good number of folks who have signed on, so I will just go ahead and get started here. Thank you all for joining us for the 2020-2021 ANRE Intern Colloquium. For those of you just tuning in, my name is Felicia Garcia, and I'm the Curator of Education at SAR's Indian Arts Research Center. The School for Advanced Research is located on Tewa land in Ogapoge, which means White Shell Water Place. Surrounding our campus are the landscapes of the Pueblo, Apache, and Navajo communities, whose people all continue to maintain vital connections to this place. As an institution that's privileged to steward Indigenous cultural material and committed to uplifting Indigenous voices, we strive to maintain respectful and mutually beneficial relationships with these communities. We not only honor the ancestral stewards of this land, but celebrate their past, present, and future. And just before I introduce our speakers, just to note to all of our viewers, after we view their pre-recorded presentations, Shándíín and Emily will be joining us for a live Q&A. So please type any questions that you have into the questions box, which you can access by clicking on the little Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. All right, let's get started. It is my great pleasure to introduce today's speakers, Emily Santhanam and Shándíín Brown. This past year has been challenging for all of us in so many ways, and it has required us to completely reimagine the format of the ANRE internship program. So I just want to commend this year's interns who have been incredibly flexible and supportive along the way. It has been such a joy to work with these two brilliant Indigenous women over the past year. Shándíín Brown is a citizen of the Navajo Nation and a recent graduate of Dartmouth College, where she earned her Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology and Native American Studies. Shándíín is interested in curatorial work, and before coming to SAR, she interned at the Dartmouth Hood Museum of Art, where she curated her first exhibition, Unbroken, which focused on the transition from traditional to contemporary within the Southwest Native American ceramics. She has also previously held positions at the Hood Museum, the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, and the University of Arizona Southwest Environmental Health Sciences Center. Today, she'll be speaking about her online exhibit, A Story of Evolution, the Impact of the Sewing Machine in Native American Fashion, which presents 21 garments from the IARC permanent collection with the goal of representing 4 thematic snapshots of Native American fashion impacted by the sewing machine. Emily Santhanam is a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation and came to SAR from Oklahoma, where she previously worked as a curator for the Chickasaw Nation Cultural Center for the past 3 years before coming to Santa Fe. Emily earned her Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology from Stanford University in 2016, and she hopes to pursue a master's degree in the future. She also is primarily interested in curatorial work, and in 2018, she worked on an exhibition at the Chickasaw Nation Cultural Center that featured loan works from the IARC and was titled Sculpting Cultures, Southeast and Southwest Native Pottery. Today, Emily will be speaking about the shift toward online exhibitions and programming at the Indian Arts Research Center with an emphasis on the organization, creation, and curation of her online exhibit, The Western Aesthetic, Bolo Ties in the IARC Collection, which features a selection of pieces from the IARC's collection of Native American-made bolo ties, and her exhibition highlights the creativity of 20th century tribal artists working within that medium. So I'm really looking forward to these presentations today, and without further ado, please join me in welcoming Shándíín Brown, whose presentation will be followed by Emily Santhanam's.
Yat eshk dosha dina she Haley Shándíín Brown inisha. Kia ani nishle, Bilagana Bushichin, Tlizatana Dishache, do Bilagana Dishnele. Hi everyone, my name is Shándíín Brown, and I'm so excited to be here with you today. Today I'm going to be presenting about my online curatorial project. The title of my online curatorial project is A Story of Evolution, the Impact of the Sewing Machine in Native American Fashion. During my 9 months here at the SAR IARC as a 2020-2021 ANRE intern, I did a lot of projects, but this is just one of them, and I'm really excited that I have the opportunity to share my work with you. So before I get into the meat of the presentation, I just want to give a big thank you to the School for Advanced Research for hosting me this past 9 months. This past month has been difficult for all of us in the COVID-19 pandemic, but I found safety and comfort here at SAR. And I also want to give a big thank you to the IARC, to all of my colleagues there. Thank you so much for mentoring and supporting me. I've had a really good time. And a really big thank you to Felicia Garcia and Alicia Poon, who have helped me navigate this project and make it so concise. When I first started, I had so many ideas and I was so excited. I think I had just like a brain full and overflowing. And now I'm so excited to show you this project, which is nice and clear and concise. So quickly, I want to say that by the time this is being broadcasted for the live Q&A, you can go to the School for Advanced Research website, click on the online exhibition tab, and you'll see my project. So feel free to go there after the presentation. So now I'm going to kind of talk about some background and the reasons why I went into this specific topic. So this photo on the left is my grandmother, Thelma Begay, at the Chilocco Agricultural Indian School in Oklahoma. My grandmother went to Chilocco, like many other young Native people in the early to mid 20th century. She was required by law to go to a Western form of education. And so she lived on the reservation her entire life, but when she got to high school, she went to Chilocco. Chilocco offered a wide variety of trades for their students to learn from. And my grandmother excelled specifically in sewing, homemaking, and being a seamstress. And so once she graduated from Chilocco, she became a seamstress professionally, and due to the Indian Relocation Act of 1956, she relocated to Los Angeles, California, where she was a full-time professional seamstress while raising a family. So growing up, I had a deep respect and understanding for the work of seamstresses because of my grandmother. In this photo on the right, you'll see me in Tuba City, Arizona, wearing a traditional Navajo outfit. I say traditional, but what is traditional in Native American fashion can really be debated. But this is a classic three-tiered cotton skirt with a velveteen blouse with a collar and button-down top. So this is something that my grandmother sewed for me, and she was so talented. I would tell her a color that I wanted, and she sewed me many outfits like this. But I think this is really the background for my interest in Native American and specifically Navajo fashion. So to get started about when I started to see Native fashion as an art and a subsect of cultural anthropology, this occurred during my undergraduate years at Dartmouth College. When I was an undergraduate, I was really fortunate to intern at the Heard Museum in Phoenix, Arizona. So this photo on the left is me at the Heard Museum Indian Market Fashion Show. So not only was I fortunate enough to organize the event, I also modeled for Maya Stewart, who is a Chickasaw, Creek, and Choctaw designer. She's really fabulous, and I encourage you to check out her online website. And on the right, it's me at the Dartmouth Indigenous Fashion Showcase. So I was really fortunate to help organize this event and also model in the show. And through these avenues and events, I really started seeing how Native American fashion can blend with Western couture fashion, and also how my grandmother back in her day might have been considered a craftsperson, but now I think Native fashion has more of respect as an art. Furthermore, in cultural anthropology, we see that the whole study is about the reasons and the culture of humans and why they exist. And I think that fashion is a great way for humans to express their identity. So for me, Native fashion is so much more than just one subsect of study. It's very intersectional, and it's been a joy to work on it. So in this next slide, I want to talk about international Indigenous fashion. So last year in 2020, I was fortunate enough to be in Aotearoa, or New Zealand, studying at the University of Auckland, specifically anthropology. So for one of my cultural anthropology classes, I started to make a Aotearoa Vogue, which was a Maori-styled Vogue. It was really cool, and this is the cover on the left. So when you opened it up, there was news articles, and everything was about Maori fashion. Part of this project, I got to go to the first Maori department store in Auckland, and also work with Janine Clarkin, who is a Maori fashion designer. She specifically works with Maori prints and what it means to be a sustainable Indigenous designer. This really opened my world to not only North American Indigenous fashion, but Indigenous fashion across the globe. There's so many connections between us as Native people in North America and people in New Zealand, the Maori. So on the right, this is a photo of me on a traditional Maori waka voyage, or for the weekend, I was on a traditional Maori-style boat with Janine. She's pictured in the pink, looking fabulous as ever. And we really got to talk about what it means to not only be an Indigenous woman, but into couture fashion, as Janine has shown at many fashion weeks across the globe. And to the right of me is Mahalani DuPont, who is the model in my Vogue cover. So now I'm going to talk about Native American fashion at the School for Advanced Research. So on the left, that's a beautiful photo of Vault 1 at the IARC. And when you first walk in, the Pueblo pottery is breathtaking. I'm sure we have all been there and just been amazed by the work. But if you go upstairs in Vault 1, that's where the textiles and garments are housed. If you ever get the chance to come back to the IRC, I definitely encourage you to look at that. So when I started this online exhibition project, I knew I wanted it to be about fashion. And for me, a really great foundation of Native American fashion studies at SAR has been Dr. Jessica Metcalf, who is the 2008 to 2009 Harvey W. Brenniger Jr. Native Intern. Dr. Metcalf is Turtle Mountain, Chippewa, and she's not only the founder, but also the organizer of Beyond Buckskin, the blog, and also the boutique. And right now on the SAR YouTube channel, you can watch one of her talks at SAR, where she also talks about the evolution of Native American fashion. So now I'm going to kind of talk about hand sewing in Native American communities before the access and tools of the sewing machine. So on the left is a photo of Colville girls hand sewing at St. Mary's Mission School in Elmark, Washington. So Native women have hand sewed for time immemorial. It was a way to not only create clothes, but also build community. And so in the middle photo, it's a Kiowa girl with a buckskin dress. This photo dates from about 1815 to 1900. And note the elk teeth that is adorned on the top of her shirt. And these types of dresses were really common before Euro-American influence, with the bringing of velveteens, cotton blends, polyesters, and silks. So this is a great example of a buckskin dress that a tribal person would wear. And when people were hunting back in the day, they were hunting not only for meat, but fashion materials. And so on the right, it's a picture of some Navajo moccasins. Navajo people still wear these today, as do many Native people across the country wear their moccasins. But this is interesting to note that Navajo moccasins today are still hand sewn because of the thickness of the cowhide. So the hand sewing art is not lost at all, but rather people now use sewing machines because it's a little bit easier and makes the craft go by faster. So back in the day, if you weren't hand sewing your garments, you were probably weaving them, especially in Southwest tribal communities like the Navajo, Hopi, and Pueblo. So on the left is a beautiful image of a Navajo woman weaving a textile. And Navajo people weave all types of garments, including shawls, dresses, and headbands. On the right is Louis Garcia, who is a Tiwa and Piro Pueblo weaver. He was also the 2012 Ronald and Susan Dubin Fellow. So Louis is a master Pueblo weaver, and again, this is also an example of another tribe weaving their garments in fashion. So for the first component of my exhibit, it's the pre-sewing machine. So like I said before, back in the day, you were either hand sewing or weaving your garments. And again, I just want to emphasize that this craft is not lost, rather it's in duality with using a sewing machine. So the first photo on the left is IFT93, which is a really lovely breechcloth that dates from 1800 to 1850. The specific artist is unknown, but we suspect this is from Acoma. Men back in the day would often wear breechcloth or kilts, but as Euro-American influence infiltrated Native communities, they started wearing pants more. And so on the right, we have a chief's blanket from 1865 to 1875 approximately. The exact maker is unknown, but this is of Navajo origin. Navajos were infamous and famous for their rugs across the United States, so other tribes would trade for them, and specifically a chief blanket was very coveted. For my next two pieces, it's a beautiful dress. In Navajo, we call these bilts. So this is made by an unknown artist, but it dates from about 1870, around that time. And you'll note in this photo that the two rug pieces are separate. For the photograph, they were laid on top of each other, but Navajo women would normally connect these two with a sash belt or some type of concho belt. But this is a great example of a different structure of a dress. And so our next piece is IFT 624, which is a manta. We suspect this is from the community of the Zuni Pueblo, dates around 1880s, and this is a great example of what Native people would use for a coat. So the shawl was used in winter to keep warm, but it was a multidisciplinary piece. You could use this in a variety of ways, but I included this even though it's a more plain type, but for people who are utilitarian, they wouldn't often be extremely adorned, and it's still a beautiful piece. Okay, so for the last two items in this section, we have this beautiful embroidered kilt, which is a little bit more contemporary, made by Luther Denebe in about 1964. Again, like I said before, Native men would wear kilts or breechcloths back in the day. And on the right is an unknown artist's legging tie. So we estimate that this is from the Hopi community, but it could be from another Pueblo. Note that this is another type of weaving style. It's not just pants, top, and shawl. People would also weave fashion accessories. And this is just a really beautiful example of that. Legging ties are traditionally worn in ceremony or dances, and I'm just so glad that I could exhibit this in my show. So let's talk about the technology of the sewing machine. The sewing machine was invented in the first Industrial Revolution from 1760 to 1840. Many inventors are attributed as a true inventor, but today historians are a little bit unaware about who was the first. This technology eventually disseminated to Native American communities through trade, missionaries, and boarding schools. So on the left is an image of a Crow woman on the Crow Indian Reservation on Montana at 1906. You can see her with her family around her, and she's using a Singer foot-powered sewing machine. On the right is a Seminole woman, again in the early 20th century, and she is also using a foot-powered Singer. So something to note to everyone watching is that the Singer sewing machine, as iconic as it is, the electric version was not introduced until the mid-20th century. So these early Native women were using foot-powered. Foot-powered sewing machines definitely make a big difference when it's compared to hand sewing, so it's an improvement, but we really see an acceleration in fashion designs once we get to the electric sewing machine. So on the left here is a beautiful tiered Navajo cotton skirt. It's made by an unknown artist, and it dates to around 1964. Like I said, this is a classic style. On the right is also a beautiful Navajo shirt, and it's around 1966 from an unknown artist. So the stories behind these pieces, I kind of mentioned this in the previous slides, is that Navajo people wore this after the Navajo Long Walk and forced internment at Bosque Redondo after women saw the U.S. Army soldiers' wives wearing more of a Western style. You see the collar, button downs, and these long pleated skirts. So Navajo women adopted the style after they were forcibly interned. Scholars debate whether this was because it was just much easier to wear these outfits or for stylistic reasons. The next photo on the left is a beautiful Seminole ribbon skirt. This was made from about 1962, and we're unsure of the maker. So something really fabulous is that here at the SAR IARC, we have, of course, a great collection of Southwest items, but also other items. So it's been a joy to see these different tribal items, and this is from the Seminole tribe. And so what we see is the introduction of different types of materials from Euro-American traders, which bring us to this gorgeous skirt with gorgeous colors and patterns. On the right is an unknown maker, but this is a type of Indian dress, and we think this is from the Pueblo of Acoma. And so I took a really personal interest in this piece because Pueblo women would wear these underneath their mantas. And during my research, I couldn't find the Pueblo name for this piece, and I wanted to know why. So that kind of took me down a rabbit hole of investigating the Pueblo Indian dress. On the left here is Shirley Pino from the Santa Ana Pueblo, and also the creator of Red Wing Designs. I also encourage you to check out her online website. And to the very right is me with my good friend Kailia Garcia from the Santo Domingo Pueblo, also known as the Kewa Pueblo. So I interviewed these two ladies and I asked them about this piece because I wanted to know more. And they both told me that in Caris there is no name for this type of dress that they knew of, but that this was a type of Indian dress. So when the Spaniards came to the Pueblo region, they also enforced Christianity and Catholicism and modesty. So women would wear these types of red dresses underneath their mantas, which were normally a one-sided. And as Shirley told me, this was truly the introduction of the idea of shame in these communities. On the left, you'll see a photo of some women in Acoma, and they are wearing these Indian dresses underneath their mantas. And she also brought to my attention that on the right, the same colonial project happened in the Kingdom of Hawaii. So on the right is an image of a hula dancer. You'll note under her grass skirt, there's this red cotton bloomer. So as Americans came to the island of Hawaii, they also brought with them Christianity and the ideas of modesty. So before this, Native people weren't so strict with the idea of modesty. It wasn't as big of a deal to reveal some skin. But with this colonial project, we really see a shift in Native fashion designs because of Christianity and modesty. So this kind of took me down a rabbit hole, and in my future studies and work, I kind of hope to explore this topic more. So my last two pieces in this section are a beautiful pant. This was made around 1964. Note that the floral design is typical of what tribal people will wear as scarves. Some people call them kokum scarves, some people call them sani scarves. I thought it was really neat though how this pattern was translated into some pants. And I also included these jeans, which are made by an unknown person around the 1964 era, because many Native men will wear these today with their traditional ribbon tops or velveteen tops. And as Native men have been encouraged to wear a more Western style pant, they've really adopted the jean. So now I'm going to talk about the innovation in Native American fashion. And in my studies, I found that Lloyd Kiva-New, who was a Cherokee artist and designer, really skyrocketed innovation. We see that he was one of the first influential Native fashion designers. He founded Kiva Studios in Scottsdale, Arizona, and he was also the director of the Institute of American Indian Arts from 1967 to 1978. That's him on the left. And also we see on the right, as the political movement in the 1960s really occurred with AIM and the Civil Rights Movement, we see that people start becoming along the theme of Indian and proud. They wanted to celebrate their indigeneity through their fashion. So this photo on the right is Russell Means with the Attorney General at the time at Wounded Knee in 1973. And note here that he has his hair in braids, he's wearing a Native American ribbon shirt. So we kind of see a shift in this time period. Something else I wanted to talk about during this time is the innovation also occurred due to the electric sewing machine. So the sewing machine, the electric sewing machine specifically, was created in 1889, but it wasn't portable until the 1920s. And then in the 1930s, it became lightweight and much easier to carry around. And so eventually, through time, the electric sewing machine trickled into Native American communities, especially as more people had access to the electric grid and power. So the electric sewing machine made sewing much quicker, and you could also do a variety of different stitches. Another great contribution to the movement were patterns. Patterns are something that you can buy at almost any craft store. They fold out and you can have a template to make your garment. In this specific picture, it's a Cherokee dress, but patterns come in all different types of styles, including Navajo dresses and moccasins. So for this section, I was really excited to include some incredible pieces. On the left here, we have a vest and skirt by Lucy Yepa Loden, who was from the Jemez Pueblo. So I suspect that Lucy used a sewing machine for the basic outline of the garment, but on the front, you can see the beautiful Pueblo embroidery she did. We also have in this section a beautiful Zuni dress. The artist in this is unknown, but it dates from about 1936. Again, I suspect that this individual used a sewing machine for the basic outline, but did the Pueblo embroidery themselves. The next section is we have two beautiful pieces. The first is a beaded vest by Marcus Emmerman, who is Choctaw. This dates from about 2004. In the SAR IRC collection, we have a photograph of the vest, but Marcus did bead the vest himself. To the right is these beautiful and iconic Terry Greaves beaded shoes that date from about 2003, and Terry is Kiowa. So as we see, she beaded some Converse, this specific shoe type. And so like I was talking about before, shoes are difficult to sew. So what the beauty about what Terry did is she turned something that anyone can buy from the store, Converse, I know now people do Vans, and she put an Indigenous twist on it. So if you ever get the chance, make sure you check these out at the IRC. I think both of these are a beautiful example of Western silhouettes, but with an Indigenous twist. So in 1858, Charles Frederick Worth founded and kind of created the concept of haute couture in Paris, France. On the left, we have a 1947 Dior show, and a seamstress is working on a dress. And through Western fashion, couture and haute couture have specific criteria you must follow. But I titled this slide the original couture because when you get down to the basic meaning of couture, it's design and manufacture of fashions and clothing to a client's specific requirements and measurements. And that's something that Native American fashion makers and craftspeople and artists have been really doing since time immemorial. The idea was you're making outfits for a specific person with intention, good medicine, and care. And a great example of that is on the right. This is a photo of a Navajo woman sewing on her Singer foot-powered sewing machine in a traditional Navajo-style house that we call a hogan. So, criteria for haute couture. This term was founded and created in 1945. Its a design must be made to order with multiple fittings. You must have a workshop in Paris with at least 15 plus staff. You also must have 20 full-time technical seamstresses working, and 50 designs must be released to the public every fashion season. And I mentioned this term haute couture because I think more Native people are moving towards it, but also I think we can kind of decolonize the word haute couture as Native people are in North America instead of Paris. But I'm really excited to see what couture designers who are Indigenous are bringing to the table. So an iconic fashion designer, couture fashion designer at the SAR IRC is Juanita Crispin Lee from the Santo Domingo, also known as Kiowa Pueblo. On the left is a boy's shirt from 1960s. So Juanita used a sewing machine for all of her pieces, but you can see the beautiful Pueblo embroidery. And the same is for this really gorgeous vest on the right, which is a boy's vest, also dates around 1960s. And Juanita Crispin Lee had a really awesome story. Like my grandmother, she was raised in a boarding school where she learned how to be a housemaker, sew, and be a seamstress. But she was such a talent that she was educated at the Traffican School of Fashion in New York City. And so it's a real joy to see her pieces here at the IARC. These next two are also pieces by Juanita Crispin Lee, who was, as I mentioned before, an iconic couture designer. So these pieces are both from about the 1960s. During this time, there weren't a lot of women Native fashion designers, granted Native fashion designers in general. So she was really a great trailbreaker. And what makes these coutures, they were made for a specific person. And this pantsuit on the right was specifically made for an individual attending a wedding. And on the left, I love this style. It reminds me of a Dior style dress. And the beauty, I think, of her pieces is that you could wear these to a tribal event and people would recognize the Pueblo embroidery, but you could also wear this in New York City to a fashion week and people would still understand the mod stylistic references. And I would like to note that these pieces were generously donated by Erin Keenate, who is a 2014 Rollin and Mary King Fellow. So for the last piece of my exhibition, it's a piece that I'm truly in love with. This is made by Lauren Aragon, who was also a King Fellow here at IARC. This dress was made in 2017. It's titled Cascade. Aragon uses a sewing machine, of course, because it makes the process go by so much quicker, but he is truly an haute couture designer. So this is of a one-of-a-kind, and it's so beautiful. Note how Lauren is also a silversmith, so we see these beautiful silver pieces on the bust. And so this piece was also shown in the 2018 Spring and Summer Emergence collection, so we're really lucky to have it at our collection at the IARC. And for this collection that this dress is from, Lauren won Couture Designer of the Year in 2018 at Phoenix Fashion Week. And just the way that it's modeled on this woman, I think it's so beautiful. The way that it really complements and flows out. And he is truly iconic, and I'm excited to see what his brand Akanav brings forward in the future. So in conclusion, I'd like to say that we in academia, but also as fashion enthusiasts, have a lot to look forward to. So through this presentation, I hope you've truly seen how much the sewing machine, both the foot pedaled and the electric, has helped innovation and evolution in Native American fashion. On the left here is a really gorgeous photo that was featured in Vogue magazine in an article written by Christian Allaire, who's a newcomer to the Vogue team, and he's always writing new Indigenous fashion pieces, so make sure you check him out in his articles in Vogue. But this specific photo is from the article, How 6 Indigenous Designers Are Using Fashion to Reclaim Culture. And I think that as more mainstream publications like Vogue start recognizing Indigenous fashion, there's again going to be a skyrocket in design and creativity. So I just want to mention the 6 artists featured in that piece, who are B. Yellowtail, Atombi Metals, Curtis Oland, Jamie Akuma, Evan Ducharme, and Louis Solomon. Again, I encourage you to check out their online stores as well as Instagram accounts. And so on the right here is a really awesome photo from the Santa Fe Indian Market Fashion Show. And these types of fashion shows in Indian markets are really, again, forwarding and skyrocketing the creativity in Native American fashion. And I'm really excited for this year's Swaya Fashion Show, as well as the We Are Seeds Fashion Show and the Herd Indian Market Fashion Show. So in conclusion, I think that the sewing machine has been really revolutionary in Native American fashion, and we have a lot to look forward to as viewers for what is created next. Something else I'd like to mention is that I think it's really cool that museums and academia is starting to accept Native fashion. For example, having the Cascade dress at the IARC collection has been really important because it's seeing Native American fashion as an art and not just a craft. So thank you so much to everyone who's watching. I really appreciate it. And feel free to ask any questions. Thanks.
Chukma, Sahoshafot, Emily Santhanam, Chikasha Saya. Hello, my name is Emily Santhanam, and I'm a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation and a current ANRE intern at the School for Advanced Research's Indian Arts Research Center. I'd like to second Felicia's land acknowledgement and also mention that she spoke about the importance of meaningful land acknowledgements for cultural Western institutions during her ANRE intern presentation back in 2019. It's hopeful seeing her work enacted at SIR. It signifies not only the impact of her scholarship, but also the potential importance of these intern presentations as a whole. So I'll be focusing my current presentation on the shift toward online exhibitions programming at the Indian Arts Research Center. My presentation will speak to the organization, creation, and curation of an online exhibit that I put together this past year titled The Western Aesthetic, Bolo Ties in the Indian Arts Research Center collection. By looking in depth at the online exhibition process, including the remote and hands-on forms of research and planning that were conducted, This presentation will highlight the importance of flexibility, as well as creativity in museum exhibitions and collections contexts. It also serves to outline the challenges, joys, and surprises that can arise when pivoting toward online platforms during the course of an internship during a pandemic. I entered this internship in residence in September of 2020, which, as I said, is right in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, which, of course, is still impacting the ways that we live our lives today. This presentation, for example, is being filmed and will live separately on a different date. Whereas in any other year, I'd be giving this presentation surrounded by other scholars, community members, and SAR staff. Yet creating pandemic workarounds, like filming and recording this virtual presentation for the public, speaks positively of how SAR has pivoted during this challenging time for our institution, country, and the world around us. Despite closing campus to visitors and many staff members, SAR has still been able to produce engaging programming for established members while also expanding to reach new demographics outside of Santa Fe. The IARC speaker series was hosted online this past year. Classes, talks, and symposia were successfully attended virtually. And fellow intern Shándíín Brown and I were able to host our own live interviews over Instagram Live this past April, which focused on creators and curators in the field of Indigenous fashion, which ties in really well with the talk that Shándíín just gave. And you can see here a couple of graphics that we created to help market our event. Those Instagram interviews, along with Felicia's SAR Artists Live's interviews, are archived both on SAR's Instagram and YouTube page if you're interested in checking them out. The IARC was also strategic in rethinking how to approach the NRA internship and the exhibits in general. Typically, interns have the option to curate 2 different exhibits within the vaults, one in the spring and one in the fall. Yet when Shándíín and I arrived on campus this past fall, SAR was being rightfully cautious about in-person working events, specifically in confined spaces like a collections facility. The IARC staff decided to postpone tactile, hands-on curation and instead steered us towards a new role, which was learning how to produce online exhibitions. For the purposes of this presentation, there are 2 locations where online exhibits live for SAR. It's the SAR online exhibit webpage and eMuseum. eMuseum ties directly to collection records in TMS, also known as the museum system, which is the collections management and registration database that we use in the collections. These 2 exhibit platforms complement one another because the SAR exhibit page allows for extended text, which includes an introduction, 4 subsections, and a couple of quotes for my project, while eMuseum provides more in-depth information on the objects themselves. This is an example of the exhibit that Alicia Poon, the director of the Indian Arts Research Center, created for the SAR website, and which I use as a template and a layout for my own exhibit. Hers is titled Bursts of Light, Contemporary Glass at the IARC, and while I did use her layout as a sample, she did include multimedia visual dimensions within her exhibit, and I hope to do that in future projects that are based online. These online exhibits serve to highlight and group works within the Indian Arts Research Center collections, particularly for people who aren't able to visit collections in person. And naturally, this became much more important and crucial during this past year for cultural institutions. While part of the ANRAE internship was remote during the fall, given work-from-home orders and quarantine guidelines, we were still granted access to TMS from home. It was actually while working in the database on registration projects, namely updating materials and dates in the jewelry records, that I came across what would become my exhibit topic, the Bolo tie. And you can see here in the slide that I've circled the sections of the object records that I was working in when I came across this subject matter. And this piece here by Jay Ayule will be included in the online exhibit. This ultimately speaks to how crucial collections databases and records management is for the whole of an institution, not just for the registration side. The more robust a collection record, the more meaningful access becomes for researchers, community members, and interns. Had I not been updating the jewelry records from home, I might not have come across the Bolo ties within the Indian Arts Research Center collection. As someone who has never lived in the Southwest before this internship, I've always been really fascinated by differences in dress, fashion, and adornment across the country. I've heard Santa Fe coworkers and friends talk about the fashion they've seen at Indian Market, not necessarily on the runway during the Native Fashion Show, but instead on the street. There's a boldness and oftentimes a flashiness that comes with that quintessential mainstream Western style. Bolo ties in particular interest me because they're so strongly tied to the West, yet aren't necessarily always associated with Native American artistry in the same ways that squash blossom necklaces or clustered turquoise bracelets are. Recently, I've seen high fashion brands like Prada and Versace creating their own forms of bolo ties. In fact, just last year, the Prada bolo tie was considered to be the year's viral celebrity accessory, with singers, actors, and fashion icons sporting the tie on the red carpet. In a 2020 interview, a Prada spokesperson called the bolo a new type of accessory, which for me begged the question, what is the history of the bolo tie? Why is it so strongly associated with the West? And why have Native American artists largely been written out of this narrative? With these questions in mind, I began the process of researching and selecting bolo ties to exhibit from the IARC collection. Given that most cultural institutions across town were closed during the time that I was preparing this exhibit, I wasn't able to visit other research institutions or see how jewelry exhibitions were produced in person. Instead, I relied on the SAR and II libraries, as well as online research papers published on JSTOR. In particular, I drew from the book Native American Bolo Ties, Vintage and Contemporary Artists by Diana F. Pardue and Norman L. Sandfield. Instead, I relied on the SAR and II libraries, as well as online research papers published on JSTOR. In particular, I drew from the book Native American Bolo Ties, Vintage and Contemporary Artistry by Diana Pardue and Norman Sandfield, which I would recommend for anyone who's really interested in digging deeper into the subject matter. As part of my research, I also conducted an artist interview for research with Dwayne Mucktimer, who has a bolo tie set on exhibit. Dwayne is Hopi in Laguna and is a master jeweler, designer, and craftsman. He was also a former Catherine H. Lamont Fellow at SAR back in 1987 to 1988. During our call, Dwayne shared his background in the arts, as well as a particular story behind his piece that is housed in the SAR collections. He also mentioned that he still kept sketchbooks from early days of his artistic career, and graciously emailed me a photo of one of his sketchbooks from 1974, which actually inspired the making of his piece that we now have in our online exhibit. So that was a really exciting link to find with Dwayne. Ideally, I would have liked to incorporate more artist voices within this online exhibit, but I do look forward to prioritizing that kind of knowledge in future curatorial projects. Another form of research that helped with this exhibit was reading through the existing information included in the object records in TMS. What I found particularly useful is that for pieces that have undergone tribal collection reviews, there is community knowledge that's documented in the records online. I do also want to reiterate that these remarks were shared with and vetted by tribal community members before any information was published on our end. So again, because of pandemic restrictions, I wasn't able to sit in person on any of the collection reviews from this past year. But it was exciting to see tribal knowledge being incorporated into a museum database. For the Zuni bolo ties, for example, the tribal collection review remarks included knowledge about materials, handmade versus commercial tips and clasps on the ties themselves, motifs and designs, and even suggestions or information about artists who might have been the makers of particular unidentified pieces. This bolo tie, for example, was examined by Jim Enote and Octavius Seotewa during a collection review visit back in December of 2010. And you can see the bolo on the left and then a screenshot of the TMS database on the right. And I think it's really incredible how IRC staff was able to retrofit the database to include some of these tribal remarks. So Jim and Octavius, with this particular piece, they clarified the materials used and identified 2 different kinds of turquoise within the piece. They expanded upon the techniques utilized and mentioned that while it does primarily incorporate channel inlay, there is a bit of mosaic inlay on the bandolier across the figure. And they also corrected a previous catalog description that had mistakenly identified the figure as a knife-wing god when it is strictly a symbol. They also knew information about the artist, Deborah Gasper, who is the daughter of the well-known carvings artist Pete Gasper, and which I wouldn't have known had they not included that within their tribal remarks. I mention these details to remind us of the importance of the tribal collection reviews planned and executed by the IARC. Tribal knowledge is necessary within a collection that stewards contemporary and historic Indigenous arts. Building relationships with communities does allow for record misinformation to be corrected, which is important, but it also, I would argue more importantly, prioritizes tribal perspectives, knowledge, and also desires for sharing that knowledge. When community members do wish to share that knowledge with us, it can and should be incorporated into collection databases and object records like it was with this particular bolo tie. Thus far, I've mentioned a handful of bolo ties that are included in the exhibit, but now I'd like to take a minute to expand out and briefly discuss broader trends within the collection. We have 51 objects listed in the database as bolo ties, including works attributed to Dene, Hopi, Santa Clara, Santo Domingo, and Zuni artists. 36 of the 51 bolos, so over half, are part of the Henry S. Galbraith donation. 7 were donated by Dr. Fabrizia Marcus, 3 came in from a trade with the Waxwell Museum of Anthropology, 1 was donated by Betty Vortman, 1 by Nelson Grice, and a handful of bolos were sold or donated by artists themselves. And those artists include Paul Safki, Fermin Aguilar, Andrew Vandewa, and Rudel and Nancy Lascencello. I include these specifics to note that the exhibit is far from an exhaustive or necessarily representative display of Native American-made bolo ties. Many of the bolos came from generous donors who had their own collecting preferences, tastes, and preferred styles. I think this is a really important fact to remember, especially when we consider what it looks like to curate an exhibit from one single collection. While the majority of our ties are attributed to Zuni artists, for example, that doesn't necessarily mean that Zuni silversmiths were producing more bolo ties than Hopi or Dene artists throughout the 20th century. Collective preferences can and do skew the types of styles and designs that appear in a museum or research collection. For my exhibit, I sought to include a diversity of bolo tie examples. I wanted to showcase a range of tribal artists, both identified and unidentified, different jewelry methods, so including channel inlay, mosaic inlay, silver overlay, and other 3-dimensional works, a variety of manufacturing dates, so both older and newer accessions, and a sampling of bolo tie slider subjects, so anything ranging from animals to figures to geometric designs. My exhibit ultimately includes 25 pieces that, again, I delineated by the type of technique used. So 11 examples of channel work, 6 of mosaic, 3 of overlay, and 5 that are sculptural or other 3-dimensional arts. I decided to delineate my exhibit by method as opposed to tribal affiliation or design subject. And through making this decision, I wanted to show that while some jewelry techniques do tend to be associated with specific Pueblos or tribal communities, there's always cross-cultural overlap and individual artistic expression that needs to be considered. Once I reviewed the information associated with each bolo tie in our collection, completed my research and writing, and selected the 25 pieces to have on virtual display, I began the process of preparing the exhibit to go live online. Jennifer Day, the IARC's head registrar, checked that there were no copyright or cultural sensitivity concerns for the objects, and disabled the Zoom function online for works that we didn't have copyright permissions for. Next, the bolo tie records in TMS needed to be updated and fact-checked to ensure that the data was vetted and uniform, since the information would be linking directly to eMuseum. And as part of this step, I created an exhibition package within TMS, and you can see some of that back-end work here, which would translate directly to eMuseum once published. And on the left side pane of the package view here, you can see the 25 objects that were included in the exhibit. This data transfer is helpful in two ways. It allows the online exhibit to show up in a virtual space that's accessible to the public, and it also helps us improve the object records in the database for future artist, research, and community requests. Many of the bolo tie and slide measurements, for example, were inaccurate at the beginning of this project. Jen and I pulled each bolo tie that was going to be on exhibit virtually and spent a morning physically measuring each work and updating the measurements in TMS. And that included both the slider size as well as the full-length bolo tie size as well. Jen also organized for Addison Doty, a contract photographer, to photograph the works that were either lacking in photos or that needed updated imagery. A high-quality digital photo is integral to any exhibit, especially those that will live online. We ended up photographing a couple of pieces ourselves, Jen and I, which was another learning process in terms of figuring out lighting, camera setup for objects, especially silver objects, image aesthetics, and digital formatting. After pulling bolo ties for photography and measuring, I also spent time crafting new mounts for bolo ties that needed upgraded homes. And being able to handle the pieces in person helped develop my mount making collection management skills that we'd been learning throughout the internship as well. And that was sort of an unexpected bonus to a project I thought would be primarily virtual. Ultimately, even though this exhibit project was centered online, I was still able to interact with and work hands-on with the bolo ties inside the vaults. The process became a balanced mix of online and in-person exhibition preparation. Felicia completed the back-end work of adding the exhibit to SAR's website, and Jen is currently working on getting the eMuseum exhibit up and running. And this is a visual peek at the published exhibit, which you can visit at the Online Exhibitions tab on the SAR website. You can see the introduction here, and then a couple of screenshots of the subsections by technique. So you can see channel work, mosaic work, overlay work, and then the sculptural and other three-dimensional works, all delineated separately. What's also really great about the way that these two platforms work together is that if you press the More Info tab that I've circled in red, you'll actually link over to the eMuseum page, where you can see a larger view, a better image of the object, and also read a deeper description of each piece. And you can see that there is even a place where you can read the tribal collection review remarks, which I think is a really important aspect to the way that eMuseum functions. To wrap up my presentation, I'll read from the introductory text of my exhibit, The Western Aesthetic, Bolo Ties in the Indian Arts Research Center collection. And if you're interested in reading further, you can dive deeper into the exhibit by accessing SAR's exhibit page. The West is not a place, it is a state of mind. Jack Wheel, founder of Rockmat Ranch Wear. When it comes to men's fashion, the bolo tie has a whiff of the American West. Braided into their leather cords are assumptions of masculine freedom, rugged individualism, and the bucking of convention. These cowboy neckties, which gained popularity in the 1950s by countering business suits and formal menswear, ultimately marked a dressed-down style and casual way of life. As cowboy films and country music swelled the American market, consumers sought out Western jewelry and accessories to dress toward the nostalgic trend. Since then, bolo ties have waxed and waned in the fashion world, worn by rockabilly and new wave bands in the 1980s, celebrity figures like Bill Murray and Johnny Depp, and more recently, urban male and female millennials from New York City to Tokyo, Japan. Yet the history of the bolo tie, rooted in Native American artistry and innovation, is too frequently overshadowed by mythologies of the West. Credit is often given to those who filed the first patents, not those who fashioned the first designs based on scarf slides and tribal neck ornaments. Pueblo and Dene artists weren't just responding to tourist trends in the early to mid-20th century. They were repurposing materials, restructuring designs, and reimagining Western style. The Indian Arts Research Center is proud to steward a unique collection of bolo ties dating from the 1950s onward. This online exhibition includes the work of Pueblo and Dene artists, highlighting the diversity of jewelry making practices within and between Native American tribes. While the subsections of this exhibit are delineated by jewelry technique, channel work, mosaic work, overlay work, and other three-dimensional work, many artists have combined and blended these methods, personalizing their design processes. As luxury brands like Prada and Versace step into the burgeoning Bolo Thai market, it's important to pay homage to these native artists. They laid the foundation years ago and crafted by hand a Western aesthetic that's still wrapping around our world. So to conclude, what I really enjoyed about this online exhibition process is that at the end of the day, it brought together all four aspects of the ANRI internship. So that's the curation, education, registration, and even collections management side. It allowed for both remote and hands-on research and was a practice in creativity and flexibility. Importantly, I was also able to co-curate an in-person exhibit in Vaults 1 and 2, as well as in the painting bays, which I organized with my fellow intern Shándíín. Having the opportunity to curate two very different exhibits, both in subject and in practice, was an unexpected joy of this past year's pivoting. Learning how to navigate online and virtual forms of programming is a necessary skill for any museum professional in our current era. And I've been fortunate to use my professional development stipend through this internship to enroll in multiple online courses that are focused on this very subject, including one that was an introduction to 3D gallery design and one that focused on building online exhibitions on a budget. Having taken these courses, I can imagine future applications and implications for online exhibitions at the IARC. It could be possible for interns to take classes in 3D gallery design, for example, and to use tools like SketchUp or InDesign to create virtual gallery spaces where they can display their exhibit on the ground. This could add a meaningful visual component to exhibit curation, supplementing the text and object information that would already be included on SER's exhibit page and eMuseum. At this point, I'd like to thank the SER community, in particular those that I've worked closely with at the Indian Arts Research Center, and I look forward to taking questions. Chuk Mashki, thank you.
Oh, thank you both for those interesting presentations. I have loved working with you on the process of creating these exhibitions, and I included the link in the chat here for our viewers. I highly encourage you all to visit our website and check out these online exhibitions. And they also mentioned an in-person exhibition, which we hope that you all will be able to see in the future when we are open to the public once again. So Emily and Shándíín, I think we have some questions from the audience here. If you'd like to come back on screen. Hello.
Hello.
All right, so we have some great questions from the audience here. I have some questions of my own, and so I'll kind of go back and forth between the two. So the first question is for me. Shándíín, I love that you've had a consistent interest in Native American fashion, or I should say Indigenous fashion. Do you plan to continue researching this topic? And if so, are there any other themes or topics within Native fashion that you wish to explore?
Thank you, Felicia. What a loaded question. I'm like, how long can I take to answer this? So yes, definitely. One of my sources in my presentation and on my online exhibition was Native Fashion Now by Karen Kramer. And the fact that she not only has like her online in book catalog, which you should all check out. I'm just plugging everyone. So it's a book, and then also it was on at the Peabody Essex Museum. I thought that was really cool. And I also liked her diversity of fashion designers. But I think for me specifically, being Dene and having really grown up in my own culture, I think something like that that's more specialized onto like Navajo fashion designers would be really cool. So I'm thinking like modeling it after that, like an in-person exhibit along with a catalog, because I just think that the catalog gives so many more people an opportunity. Like I have never been to Peabody Essex Museum, but just being able to read the book and buy the book was really cool. Because also I think, you know, in terms of being a young museum professional. I want to make things accessible. That's something that's really important to me. And I also like how, like, with me and Emily's show, that it's online. But anyways, back to the question. Like, a lot of Navajo designers like come to mind, but I think my really like top person I'm thinking of right now is Orlando Doogie. Um, at last year's Swaya fashion show, just seeing his designs was so inspirational. And I was like, oh my God, I need every single collection. But again, kind of like I talked to my presentation, like being able for art museums and institutions to buy that and recognize it as not only, you know, a beautiful fashion piece that's also ethnographic, but as really a piece of art, I think is really important. And also pieces of art that are available for people to see. So it's not just in my closet, but a lot of people who go to museums, I don't know which museum, but for people to be able to see that, I think is really cool, especially as, you know, couture designers do so much intricate work. The availability to see that in person, I think, is really important. So yeah, that's my answer.
Great, thank you. Emily, I have a question for you. So in your application for the internship, you mentioned an interest in themes such as trade, adaptation, tourist culture, and commodification, which I think perfectly ties into the theme for your online exhibit. What inspired your interest in these particular themes?
Sure. Yeah, I guess, well, some of those topics were actually covered, I think, in some exhibits that were mentioned on the Indigenous Research Center page in terms of other projects either interns have done or other staff members have done at SAR. And I just really liked that we were investigating different aspects of how cultural arts were created in the 20th century and not strictly talking about works that were created pre-contact or sort of like romanticizing ways in which Native people were creating arts or keeping tradition. I liked that in sort of investigating different aspects that were impacting Native peoples throughout the 20th century, it sort of adds more context to the works that getting created and kind of broadens out the subject matter beyond just sort of a romanticizing of what Native peoples produce. And so, yes, it did end up tying into not only the Bolo ties exhibit, but also the exhibit that Shándíín and I put on in the vaults as well. And so it was really exciting being able to talk about that interest in my application, but then also enact it in person and then virtually here as an intern. So yeah, it was an exciting, I guess, thread that sort of kept on in my time here.
Yes, definitely. Okay, so we have another question for Shándíín from Amanda Thompson. They say, great exhibition and presentation, Shándíín. If you were able to build out this online exhibition more or install it physically, what would you add?
Oh man, what a question. Okay, so thank you. So let's say that there were like no limitations to what I could do. I think I would, so IRC doesn't really have an exhibition space, but I think an outside exhibition, like in the admin building garden, would be really cool, like a night of native fashion. And having like actual models wear the garments, because in some of the pieces, like there were tops or skirts, you don't really see those stylized. And I think that's important. Like, for example, that Navajo velveteen top and the pink cotton skirt, I think those would be really fabulous paired together. But for, you know, the limitations of this exhibit, I didn't have that opportunity. So yeah, I'm thinking like a wine and cheese soiree, native fashion night. And I would definitely like to see also those Juanita Crispin Lee pieces on models, because every time I go upstairs in Vault 1 and see them on the mannequin, I'm like, oh my God, I want to see these styled so bad. And I'd also include a lot more pieces, including accessories. So this past spring, I took a sash belt making class with the Hearn Museum. And like ever since then, I've been really interested in sash belts. The IRC has a really lovely collection. I know Felicia and I were talking about this like rainbow sash belt that is just so beautiful. But you know, with a fashion show and being able to have an in-person exhibit, I think you can accessorize pieces. And not only that, but like some of my favorite jewelry of the IRC. I'm just daydreaming about what could be included. In particular, I'm thinking about the Nunema Beck earrings that we have. So yeah, if, I won't daydream too much because this could turn into my own personal fashion show. But I think what's really cool about, you know, the online exhibition is being able to share this with so many people that maybe in person couldn't. So yeah, that's such a great question.
Thank you. I look forward to the day when we can have in-person wine and cheese events again. So I'll daydream with you about that. Let's see. So we have another interesting question from Jane Stone, which I think could apply to both of you and your research interests. Jane asks, imitation versus appropriation, where is the line? It's a tough question.
That is a hefty question. And I think so much of that does kind of come down to intentionality behind those who are doing the imitating or appropriating, giving recognition, like verbal recognition to people that they are drawing inspiration from. And then also, yeah, considering the context under which those pieces are sort of being inspired to create another kind of work. Yeah, I think just like being vocal about your intentions and about what aspects you are drawing from and pulling from and what cultures you are hoping to maybe pay homage to within your particular work. I think all of those factors are pretty important in terms of not tripping into the appropriation strictly category. But I don't know, Shándíín, what do you think?
I think also, you know, it's so important to listen and ask communities directly. You know, me and Emily are just two people, but something that I always think is important is that brands, institutions, and corporations should really get a broad variety of opinions from direct community members, because like I know for Navajos, we love it when people wear jewelry, like buy my jewelry, buy more Native artist jewelry. But that might not be the same for other Indigenous people across the globe. And, you know, I just think that so often we have set ideas, and being willing to change your mind about things is really important, not only on the individual level, but about like social norms and lots of things. So great question. And yeah, I'm sure me and Emily will study that and maybe have really, really solid answers like 20 years from now. So stay tuned.
Yeah, I think you're right that it's definitely an ongoing conversation and there are lots of different perspectives. I know Dr. Metcalf, whose video you featured on your exhibit, Shándíín, has spoken a lot about cultural appropriation. So I think that's a great resource to learn a bit more about that topic. Let me see, here's another one of my questions. So you both talked a little bit about the curatorial process for these online exhibits, but I'm just curious about the selection process. We have so many incredible works in the IARC collection. Was it difficult to choose which pieces to include?
I'd say it definitely was. And it was also, I would say, particularly difficult to make those selections without being able to access the pieces in person. Especially for me, I think, even though some of the dimensions are listed in the TMS database, or, you know, there are photographs included of the pieces, you don't quite have the same experience with those pieces online, digitally, as you would in person. And so, yes, I think making those selections and calls and figuring out which pieces would work well together was a bit more difficult to do remotely. And then just sort of honing down on a topic in general, I think it was difficult as well, just given how vast and diverse the Indian Arts Research collection is, and all the different paths that we could have taken. So like I said in my presentation, I kind of stumbled across the bolo ties and then kind of like tunneled into it a little further. But I can imagine that if I were working in the textile collection, for example, my exhibit would have turned out really differently because I just would have been accessing a different sort of selection of pieces through TMS. So yes, it was difficult to select pieces, but I also think it was pretty serendipitous how I came to those. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, especially for the weaving section, you know, IRC has such an amazing collection of woven textiles. And I try to do kind of like some of our older pieces to more contemporary woven pieces. So it was a challenge, especially being Dene. And I was like, I love all of these Navajo textiles. Which do I choose? But in kind of another section in like the high fashion and couture, at IRC, we really only have Juanita Crispin Lee and Lauren Aragon as couture designers. So that kind of made it easy. And I always felt like a really strong pull to those pieces as well. So if anyone watching wants to donate any native couture pieces to IRC, please do so.
Thank you for that. I love those Juanita Crispin pieces as well. That pantsuit is incredible. Let's see. So speaking of databases, Emily, which you were just talking about, Amanda Thompson says, thanks, Emily. I love your inclusion of the database in your exhibition talk. It is so central to how museums function and can determine what scholarship is produced. Do you have any other suggestions as to how collections databases can be improved for institutions stewarding Native belongings?
That is a really great question. And I wish Jen were on the call so that she could jump in with her expertise. I would say, at least in terms of the Indigenous Research Center database, I know there's been a lot of work done to incorporate tribal language when tribal people do want that language and like those translations to be accessible and included in particular object records. And so I think that is one aspect where tribal voices and perspectives and language can be integrated into a system that is primarily Western, I suppose, in its organization. So that would be one aspect. And then I also just think, I mean, the ability to have tribal collection reviews and to make sure that Native people's perspectives on their own objects are considered seriously and are only entered into the database as remarks if the community does vet them to be entered into the database. I think that could be an important inclusion for any collection that does steward Indigenous materials and arts.
Absolutely. Did you have anything to add, Shándíín?
No, I totally agree with everything.
Great. Let's see. So Carol asked a question that is kind of related to that previous one, but she is curious about if there are potentially culturally sensitive symbols on clothing or jewelry. How do you handle those objects or questions related to those objects?
That's a great question. It's also very relevant. So in this presentation, we talked about our online curatorial exhibits that are available on the website. But once SAR opens, hopefully soon, you can see our in-person exhibits, which is in Vault 1 upstairs in the painting bays, Vault 1 downstairs in the glass vitrines, and then in Vault 2 also in the glass vitrines. So that was about the Gallup Intertribal Ceremonial event posters and also about silver and different tourism collectibles in the early 20th century. And so in our silver pieces in that specific exhibit, we had a few that had the whirling log design, which is, if you don't know, that is a Dene sign that is very similar visually to the swastika, which, as we all know, has a very negative connotation. And so Emily and I actually just finished writing SAR policy, not a policy, an info sheet about the whirling log and why you know, that design is on our pieces. So I think just giving people context is super important. And it kind of the same realm as in with the Katsina SAR policy, letting people decide whether or not they want to view these pieces, and also just making our audience feel comfortable by providing accurate and thorough information is super important. And I don't know, it's hard sometimes though, because, that's such a sensitive part of history that, we have to be, as museum professionals, very sensitive to that and open-minded. So it definitely happens, I think, especially as you work with institutions that maybe have some objects that they shouldn't have. Luckily, that's not really an issue here at IRC, but in some past places I've worked with, just being super respectful and communicative and honest and thorough. There's just so many caveats that you really have to consider.
Thank you. Yes, I've appreciated both of your thoughtfulness and sensitivity when it came to curating these exhibits. And so I'm looking forward to finalizing that whirling log info sheet and then sharing with our visitors once we are open again. Let's see. So Amy has a great question, which I actually have the same question written down here. It's, how was it to collaborate on your in-person exhibit together?
Well, so our in-person exhibit was interesting because we were doing it when we were like not in the office together. So it was like worked on virtually, although in person. So it was just a different process of collaborating, like if we would have been in the office.
Yeah, it definitely was. One of the plus sides to it was you do get to have a bit more, I guess, like aesthetic pull when it comes to curating and placing pieces in the pedestals themselves. So that was one aspect where we did get to work very hands-on, in person, safely masked in the collections. And so we sort of divided and conquered with that in terms of figuring out which pieces to curate with which pieces in Vault 1, and then figuring out the layout as well for up in the bays. So it was a different process for sure than doing the virtual exhibits. But I did like that, even though it started out virtually and we just kind of had to bat ideas around on a Google Doc, we did get to then at the end work in person and really work hands-on with the objects and with the mounting and even like screwing back on the vitrine tops as well. So it was a nice collaborative effort.
Great. And as Emily and Shándíín mentioned, they will be filming some short videos, doing a brief tour of each of their in-person exhibits. And so since we don't know when we'll be open to the public again, you'll be able to get a sneak peek of their exhibits online. So keep your eyes out for that on our social media. Let's see. So it looks like we have one more question here. It's amazing. All of the audience questions have just been perfectly in line with some of the questions that I had drafted. So Basil, who was featured on our SAR Artist Live series, that was a great interview. If you haven't watched it, it's on our Instagram as an IGTV video, and I'll be working on getting it uploaded to YouTube next week. So Basil says, "Thank you for sharing your interests and research with us all. You all are so inspirational. I'm curious what you are doing after this internship and how this research project and the work you've done at SAR will inform what you'll be doing next."
Baz, the question of the most pressured question. But yeah, like Felicia said, make sure you watch, if you have time, my interview with Basil, which is another project Emily and I worked on. We collaborated with the month of April SAR Live Indigenous Fashion Series event. And so she interviewed two people, I interviewed two people, and it's really great. So check it out. But I think for me, buying Indigenous fashion is really important because not only is it a part of my research, I think it's just so much broader. It's kind of like a fun thing, so a pastime, and also like really feeds this like inner desire of me to like find wearable art. So the dress I'm wearing today is by Shirley Pino, who is featured in my presentation from Red Wing Collections in Santa Ana. So I guess hands-on doing research in the field, and like I took a sewing class with the Hearn Museum, which is how I met Shirley. And that's really important to me because you know, I just have so much fun with cultural connections, but it's also pivotal to my research. And then the next section of that, I guess I would say, is rating. I also, with SAR book allowance, bought a lot of fashion books. So this summer I will be reading a lot, which is also a fun thing, but pivotal in my research. And then after this internship, I will be moving to Rhode Island to be the Henry Luce Native Art Curatorial Fellow at the Rhode Island School of Design. So I hope to curate a lot of really cool Native fashion exhibits, but also a lot of other exhibits. I don't know. It's like kind of daunting, you know. I feel like I've always been moving around, and I'm really sad to leave Santa Fe. But yeah, that's what you can expect from me next. And if you're a Native artist enthusiast, fashion enthusiast, connect with me. I'm always looking forward to hearing more people's perspectives and ideas and who they're buying from. Right now, I'm like really big into also Emmy Studios. So just let me know. But yeah.
That was really great. I'm so excited for you and your curatorial future. Yeah, I'm also going to be sad to leave Santa Fe, but I'll be moving on as a curatorial assistant at the Harwood Museum of Art up in Taos. And sort of like Shándíín, I think I'll be doing sort of a range of curatorial tasks, but I am excited to work with a collection that has both a Native collection as well as a diverse sort of body of Spanish art and Taos society artists as well, and sort of assisting in redirecting the museum to be more of a community serving space, especially for sort of the shifting population that is Taos. So I am excited to be a part of that institution to help them moving forward with their exhibits, with their artist sort of outreach, and also with reinterpreting their collections. So that is something that I'm really looking forward to moving forward.
Well, congratulations to you both. I'm so excited to see the work that you do at these new institutions, and I hope that you continue to stay in touch with us at SAR and come back to visit anytime. Let's see, I just wanted to close with some really kind comments here in the chat. Katie Berry, who I know you have been working with at IAMOCNA and is a past INRAE intern, says, "Great job, ladies." We have a really nice comment from Carol Sandoval. She says, "I just want to congratulate both interns on a successful year. They taught us a lot about the pivot and were both such examples of grace under pressure. Thank you both for sharing your experience at SAR." And let's see. And then we have a nice comment from Corey Rowe, who is one of my colleagues from NYU. She says, "Congrats to you both. Such great work already done and amazing positions. We can't wait to see what you do next." And I just echo all of these comments. I'm so excited for you, and it's just been such a pleasure working with you both at SAR. And I'm looking forward to these last couple of weeks with you on campus. Hopefully you get to relax a little bit and maybe live a little bit less or stress-free with these projects out of the way. But yeah, I think that's all I have for you.
Yeah, thank you, Felicia. I just want to reiterate our thanks to Felicia for helping us this entire process. Also to everyone at the IRC, our supervisors. It was really amazing feeling a sense of community, even though so much was happening. Also to everyone watching, thank you. And who asked questions and comments. Yeah, I really appreciate the support and participation.
Thank you, Felicia.
All right, well, thank you both so much. And yeah, stay tuned for, I will be sharing those links, or they will be sharing those links. Someone will be sharing the links to their online exhibits on our social media, and then we'll be sharing that tour video of their online exhibits. So thank you all for tuning in, and have a great evening. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.